Picture the blazing sands of southern Iraq in the early 7th century. A battle is about to take place that will completely, irrevocably alter the balance of power in late antiquity. Welcome to this explainer where we're going to dive deep into the source material surrounding the Battle of Dhi Qar. This was the very first time a decentralized Arab tribal coalition stood united and actually defied the absolute most powerful empire of its age. We're going to weave together geopolitical history, ancient texts, and modern academic research to figure out where the historical reality ends and the epic literary tradition begins.
To understand the sheer gravity of this event, we have to look at how it was remembered. The early Islamic historian Al-Tabari recorded a legendary tradition stating this was the first military encounter where the Arabs secured their just due from the Persians. That right there instantly establishes the near mythic status this clash achieved. It wasn't just a battle over territory. In the historical memory, it became a defining symbol of identity. So let's set the scene. We are in the early 600s CE, out in the dusty, oppressive heat of the Syrian desert and the Mesopotamian frontier. It's a vast, arid landscape where the Euphrates River provides this narrow, vital lifeline of green. And in this incredibly harsh terrain, an unstoppable empire is about to crash head-on into the unbreakable desert. Which brings us to Section 1, the Sasanian buffer state falls. You see, for roughly 300 years, the Sasanian Persians didn't actually bother ruling the Arabian frontier directly. Instead, they used a proxy, the Lakhmid Kingdom, operating out of the city of Al-Hirah. The Lakhmids were an Arab Christian dynasty acting as a vital buffer state. They basically did the heavy lifting for the Persians, protecting Sasanian Iraq from Byzantine expansion, mediating tribal disputes, and using their own formidable cavalry to extract tribute from nomadic tribes. They were the ultimate middlemen, keeping the frontiers stable. But what's absolutely fascinating is how quickly 3 centuries of solid stability just evaporates. Right around 602 CE, the Sasanian king, Khosrow II, summons the Lakhmid ruler Al-Nu'man III and actually executes him. Why? Well, the sources vary, maybe suspicions of disloyalty or a refused marriage alliance, but the fallout is absolute chaos. The Persians completely abolish the Lakhmid proxy rule and try to enforce direct control. The nomadic tribes, especially the Banu Bakr Confederation, instantly reject this. They refuse to hand over Lakhmid wealth and start raiding the borders. So to crush this sudden rebellion, the Persians dispatch a heavy military expedition.
Moving on to Section 2, Armies of the Desert. The main wave of Arab resistance came from groups like the Banu Shaiban. They were a prominent, fiercely independent nomadic subclan of the broader Bakr Confederation. These were pastoralists who survived daily in the unforgiving environment between the Najd and the Euphrates. That survival made them absolute masters of mobile desert warfare. They didn't have massive walls or heavy armor. They survived on deep kinship ties, speed, and a total mastery of the terrain. And when you look at the forces lining up, the asymmetry is just staggering. On the Sasanian side, you've got a rigid, centralized hierarchy. 2,000 professional heavy soldiers, 3,000 pro-Sasanian Arab auxiliaries, and literal war elephants. But crucially, they are heavy and totally reliant on long supply lines. Against them, the Arab tribal coalition. Anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 highly mobile warriors with zero central command. They used a rotating leadership system, riding light cavalry, armed with unparalleled knowledge of local watering holes. So you really have to ask yourself, how on earth does an ad hoc alliance of nomadic herders with no formal command structure outmaneuver and completely dismantle an imperial expeditionary force bringing heavy cavalry and war elephants to the fight? Let's break it down in Section 3, the Battle of Dhi Qar. What unfolded was quite simply a masterclass in asymmetric warfare. First, the tribal coalition deliberately contested the water sources, trapping those heavily armored Persians in the arid, unforgiving terrain. Next, they leveraged their speed, launching relentless hit-and-run raids to bleed the Sasanian supply lines. When the two armies finally clashed, the Arab warriors actually engaged in single combat duels, specifically targeting and killing key Persian commanders to disrupt their chain of command. And finally, the knockout punch, a devastating hidden ambush launched from a depression known as the Hollow of Dhi Qar, catching the imperial forces completely off guard. The environment itself basically became a weapon. The historical texts paint an incredibly vivid picture. The air thick with the clanging of metal and the cries of warriors. But overriding all of it was the suffocating, oppressive heat. The Arab tribesmen were completely in their element,
but the heavy Sasanian infantry and those massive war elephants bogged down horribly in the heat and the shifting sands. It's amazing how fast an imperial army can unravel when its rigid structure is compromised. An Arab champion named Al-Hawai managed to slay a top Persian commander in combat, and the top-down Sasanian command structure instantly fragmented. Those war elephants, which were brought in to cause shock and awe, were actually routed by agile skirmishers and ended up turning back and causing massive panic within the Persian ranks. Seeing the tide turning so violently, the 3,000 Arab auxiliaries who had allied with the Persians either outright defected or just fled the field.
It took exactly one single day of intense, chaotic fighting for this decentralized, ad hoc tribal coalition to absolutely shatter the imperial expeditionary force and claim total control over the watering hole of Dhi Qar. Which leads us to Section 4, a turning point for Arabia. The immediate reality on the ground was a massive transfer of wealth and prestige. The Arab coalition walked away with minimal casualties, while hundreds of elite Sasanian soldiers and nobles were dead. The retreating imperial forces abandoned a staggering amount of weapons, along with gold, silver, and precious musk, all scooped up as spoils of war. But the real prize? That was purely psychological. The Banu Shayban and their allies suddenly woke up to a new reality. The great Persian Empire, the superpower of their world, was actually capable of bleeding. Let's explore how this was remembered in Section 5, Myth, Memory, and History. When we dig into the historical accounts from early Islamic historians, like Al-Tabari, we see Dhi Qar elevated into a romanticized, legendary symbol of pre-Islamic Arab resilience. Decades and centuries later, it was retroactively framed as this epic, necessary precursor to the massive Islamic conquests that would soon sweep across the region. These medieval records rely heavily on something called isnad, complex chains of oral transmission, combined with pre-Islamic poetic embellishments. Poets praise the tactical cunning and raw bravery of the tribes. This cultural mechanism ensured the day of Dhi Qar was permanently etched into Arab literary tradition, even if the strict tactical logistics got a bit blurred by the legend over time. But then, on the flip side, we have this genuinely stunning fact. Sasanian Persian records from the era are entirely silent on the Battle of Dhi Qar. Literally no official mention of it whatsoever. And honestly, this was a pretty standard imperial practice at the time. Just erase your small, embarrassing, localized defeats from the official state history so you can maintain the illusion of absolute, unbroken dominance. This creates a wildly fascinating historiographical debate. You have medieval Arabic history viewing it as an epic, monolithic precursor to Arab unity. You have Sasanian records offering total omission, and then you have modern scholarship which looks at the archaeological and historical context and interprets the battle as a localized skirmish over frontier administration, taxation, and imperial overreach, rather than some grand, coordinated nationalist uprising. If we look at this impartially, modern scholars like Fred Donner heavily caution against reading history backwards. As Donner notes, the idea that the tribes were just sitting around after Dhi Qar waiting to overthrow the Persians is dangerously simplistic. In reality, tribal allegiances remained incredibly fluid long after the dust settled, to the point where some of these exact same tribes later fought for the Persians against early Muslim armies just a few decades down the line. So, we find ourselves at this really compelling crossroads between history and memory. Regardless of whether you view this through the rigorous, localized lens of modern scholarship or the sweeping, romanticized verses of medieval poetry, the undeniable fact is this. At Dhi Qar, the scattered tribes of the desert proved they could stand their ground against the greatest empire of their age. So, was it a nationalist awakening or a localized skirmish whose memory was brilliantly repurposed to help shape an empire? What do you think is the true legacy of that day? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the history you think you know.